The silence of my high-end design studio was usually my sanctuary, a place where I felt in total control of every line, angle, and shadow. But that afternoon, the quiet was shattered by a vibration so persistent it felt like a physical assault against the heavy mahogany desk. Welcome to Revenge with Tian. So settle in, get comfortable. Because in these stories, people always have a choice, and when they choose wrong, life answers back. Drop a comment and don't forget to subscribe. You will like it here. I glanced down at my phone and felt my heart drop into my stomach, a cold stone sinking through deep water. 29 missed calls, then 30, then 31. They were all from a 12 area code, Chicago. I hadn't seen that specific string of numbers on my screen in over 15 years, yet my brain recognized it instantly, like a recurring nightmare that refused to stay buried in the subconscious. I didn't even have to pick up the device to know who it was or what they wanted. Only two people in the world possess that level of entitled, breathless persistence. I stared at the screen, watching the notification pop up again and again, the white light blinding in the dimmed room. Each buzz felt like a cold finger tracing the old, jagged scars on my memory. I knew that the past wasn't just calling, it was hunting me down, demanding a debt I never owed. The immediate sense of dread was overwhelming, a thick, suffocating fog that filled the room. My name is Kaylyn Blackwood, and I am 28 years old. Today, I am a sought-after architectural consultant, a woman who builds fortresses and luxury spaces for people who value security above all else. I am successful, poised, and entirely self-made. But as I stared at my reflection in the glass partition of my office, I didn't see the powerful CEO. I saw a terrified 11-year-old girl with messy pigtails and a backpack that felt far too heavy for her small, fragile shoulders. I remember the exact smell of that day, a mix of jet fuel, overpriced Cinnabon, and the metallic tang of industrial floor wax. I am a woman who spent her entire adult life changing her identity, her city, and her very soul just to escape the long-reaching shadow of Martin and Daisy Blackwood. They weren't just parents. They were high-stakes gamblers who played with human emotions as if they were nothing more than plastic poker chips. I had spent nearly 2 decades convincing myself that I had won the game by leaving them behind in the dust. But the flashing light on my phone told a different story. I was still linked to them by a chain of trauma that I hadn't quite figured out how to break. "Kaylyn? Is that really you?" The voice was Daisy's, my mother. It sounded thinner than I remembered, stripped of the sharp, condescending edge she used to wear like a designer scarf. I didn't answer immediately. I just listened to her ragged, desperate breathing through the speaker. "We need you, Kaylyn, your father. Things have taken a terrible turn. We are losing everything. Please, we are family." The word family tasted like bitter ash in my mouth. My mind drifted back to O'Hare International Airport, November 14th, 17 long years ago. It was the end of a family vacation that was really just an excuse for Martin to hit the high-limit casinos while I sat in lonely hotel lobbies. We were standing near Terminal 3, surrounded by the chaotic rush of travelers and rolling suitcases. Martin had looked at his gold watch, then at Daisy, and a cruel, familiar smirk touched his thin lips. "I'll bet you $500 she cries within 10 minutes of realizing we were gone," he whispered, not even bothering to hide his voice from. Daisy had laughed, a tinkling, cold sound like breaking glass. "Make it 1,000, Martin. She's a sensitive little thing. She won't last 5 minutes without us." They didn't just walk away. They staged a performance designed to keep me stationary and vulnerable. Martin knelt down, looking me in the eye with a fake sincerity that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. "Listen, Kaylyn, we need to go to a different terminal to get those special snacks you like. The ones with the chocolate coating and the sprinkles. You stay right here by this big blue pillar. Don't move an inch, or we won't be able to find you when we get back. Do you understand?" I nodded obediently, my heart thumping like a trapped bird against my ribs. He handed me a crumpled, dirty $20 bill and patted my backpack. "That's for an emergency, but you won't need it because we'll be right back in a flash." Then they turned and walked into the sea of people. I watched their backs disappear into the crowd. I stayed by that pillar for 1 hour, clutching my straps, then 2, then 3. I watched families reunite with joyous hugs, heard the constant chime of boarding announcements, and watched the air grow darker outside the massive glass windows. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't scared, but because a part of me realized that they were never coming back. Martin and Daisy didn't go to another terminal. I learned years later, through a drunken, boasting confession from Martin, that they had walked straight to the parking garage, retrieved their luxury car, and driven home to their suburban mansion. They spent the evening drinking expensive wine and checking their expensive watches, literally betting on my level of distress. They wanted to see if I'd have the initiative to find an airport official, or if I'd simply sit there until the janitors cleared the terminal at midnight. To them, I wasn't a child. I was a social experiment, a way to pass the time between business deals. They believed that true strength was forged through abandonment, a twisted philosophy they used to justify their neglect. But they had raised a girl who had spent her entire childhood observing their every move, learning their patterns. I knew how they navigated the world through manipulation and cold, hard logic. Standing by that blue pillar, I decided I would use their own tools to survive. I didn't go to the police or a security guard. I knew the rules of the Blackwood household. If you involved outsiders, the punishment for your weakness was doubled. I had to solve this problem entirely on my own. The Chicago wind in November feels like 1,000 tiny needles pressing into your skin, searching for a way to freeze your blood. I stood outside the arrivals gate, shivering in a thin light jacket that was never meant for the harsh Midwestern outdoors. I had no cell phone. This was years before every child had a screen in their hand for safety. I only had that single $20 bill and a vague, blurry memory of the highway signs we had passed on the drive to the airport. I realized quickly that the bill wouldn't get me a taxi all the way to the distant suburbs. The meter would eat that money in 15 minutes, leaving me stranded in a worse neighborhood. I had to be smarter, more efficient. I found a complex bus map near the transit entrance. My eyes blurred as I tried to trace the colored lines, but I forced myself to focus. I took the Blue Line train first, merging with the crowd. It was packed with grumpy, tired commuters who didn't notice a small girl tucked into the corner of a greasy seat. I watched the city lights flicker past the dark windows, my stomach growling. I used $5 to buy protein bars from a vending machine. It took me 6 agonizing hours to make that journey. 6 hours of confusing transfers, missed stops, and walking down dark suburban sidewalks where the streetlights hummed like angry, glowing bees. My legs were heavy like lead, and my toes were so numb I couldn't feel them hitting the cold pavement anymore. When I finally reached our long, winding driveway, it was nearly midnight. The house was glowing with warm, welcoming light, looking like a postcard of a perfect, wealthy life. I walked up to the front door and tried the heavy brass handle. It was locked tight. I knocked, my small, raw fist echoing against the heavy oak. Martin opened the door with a look of mild boredom. He was wearing his silk robe and holding a glass of amber scotch. He didn't look relieved to see his daughter. He didn't pull me into his arms to warm me up. He simply looked at his watch, checked the exact time, and looked back at Daisy, who was sitting comfortably on the sofa by the fireplace. 6 hours, Daisy. You were wrong about her crying, but I was wrong about the speed. She's slower than I thought. You owe me the 1,000. Daisy just sighed. For the next 7 years, I became a ghost in my own home, a silent observer of my own life. I learned the architecture of distance and the geometry of silence. I knew exactly which floorboards creaked, and which times of day Martin and Daisy were too distracted by their own reflection in the mirror to notice me passing by. I didn't ask for new clothes. I didn't share my dreams or my fears. I worked 3 part-time jobs and hid the cash inside the hollowed-out legs of my bed frame, building a secret fortune. I became an expert at search engine optimization for small businesses, working late into the night to build a digital footprint they couldn't track or control. Every grade I earned, every academic award I won, was a brick in the wall I was building between my future and their influence. They thought they were toughening me up for the real world, but they were actually training their most dangerous and capable adversary. I excelled in mathematics and structural design, realizing that if I understood how things were built, I could eventually understand how to tear them down. I never forgot the airport. Every time Martin made a snide comment, I saw the blue pillar. The day after my high school graduation was the hottest day of the year, the air thick and heavy. Martin and Daisy were planning a grand garden party to show off their successful daughter to their wealthy, vapid friends. They had bought me a silk dress I hated and a fake smile I didn't want to wear. While they were busy instructing the caterers and arranging the expensive flowers, I slipped out the back door for the last time. I didn't take much, just my laptop, my saved cash, and the same backpack I had carried at the airport all those years ago. I didn't leave a tearful, emotional letter. I left a single note on the cold marble kitchen island, pinned under Martin's favorite crystal Scotch glass. It said, "I made it home in 6 hours when I was 11. I wonder how many years it will take you to realize I'm never coming back. The bet is over. I finally won." I walked to the bus station, the sun hot on my back, and bought a one-way ticket to a city 4 states away. I changed my last name to my grandmother's maiden name. Blackwood was a brand I was no longer interested in selling. The 15 years that followed were a masterclass in self-creation and iron-willed survival. I worked my way through college, taking double shifts and sleeping on a thin mattress I found on a sidewalk. I eventually built my own firm, Blackwood Consulting, reclaiming the name on my own terms this time, and became a leader in the niche field of architectural security. I met Julian, a man whose heart was as open and honest as my parents' hearts were closed and dark. He knew my story in fragments, but he didn't pity me. He respected the cold steel in my spine. I had blocked Martin and Daisy on every possible platform. I moved 3 times, changing my address like a spy. I thought I was finally safe from their reach. I thought the silence was a permanent shield. But then the calls started, piercing the life I had built. They had found me through a public filing for my latest high-profile project. Their world was crumbling into dust, and like the parasites they were, they reached out to the only healthy hosts they thought they could still feed on. Daisy's voice on the phone was a haunting, rehearsed melody of desperation that made my skin crawl. "I need to see the documents before I even consider talking to you," I said, my voice cold, professional, and utterly devoid of emotion. I didn't say yes, and I didn't say no. I knew that Martin and Daisy were dangerous when they were cornered, and I needed to see their hand before I played mine. Daisy sent a mountain of digital files within the hour, a chaotic mess of financial ruin. It was a complete disaster. Martin had spent years running a Ponzi-style scheme with his friends at the elite club, using their money to fund a lifestyle he could never truly afford. Now, the authorities were closing in, the walls were shrinking, and the banks were seizing every single asset they owned. They were asking me to use my firm's discretionary investment funds, essentially my life savings and my company's hard-earned safety net, to buy them a luxury condo in a high-end assisted living facility. They wanted a golden parachute to escape the wreckage, and they wanted me to sew it for them for free. They claimed it would be a discreet way to handle the embarrassment. As I scrolled through the pages of debt, I realized Martin hadn't changed at all. I agreed to meet them at a sterile, brightly lit coffee shop in a neutral suburb. I arrived 20 minutes early, taking a seat where I could clearly see the front door. When they finally walked in, I almost didn't recognize the people who had once ruled my world. Martin had lost his arrogant swagger. His expensive wool suit hung loosely on a frame that had gone frail and gray. Daisy's hair was a frantic, brittle shade of blonde, and she clutched her designer handbag as if it were a life preserver in a storm. They sat down, and Martin didn't even bother to offer an apology. He just leaned forward, his eyes searching mine for a flicker of the weak girl he used to bully. "Kaylyn, thank God. We knew you'd understand the situation. We did what we had to do to survive, just like we taught you at the airport. That trip, it made you a CEO. You actually owe us this favor." He actually smiled, a ghost of that old cruel smirk appearing on his tired face. "We just need you to sign the guarantee for the new place. It's a simple formality, really." "I've reviewed the files in detail," I said, placing a thick, heavy folder on the table between us. "I cannot and will not commit my firm's funds to a luxury condo. That would be professional suicide and a breach of my fiduciary duty." Daisy's face fell instantly, her eyes filling with rehearsed, watery tears. "But Kaylyn, we'll be on the street. Have you no heart left in you?" I ignored her emotional theatrics. "However," I continued, keeping my tone flat, "I have a solution. I've recently acquired a residential property through a holding company for investment purposes. It's paid for in full. I am willing to let you live there, rent-free, provided you sign over the remaining rights to your liquidated estate to my management firm. I will handle your remaining debts and provide you with a modest monthly living allowance." They exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated relief. To them, residential property meant a smaller version of their grand mansion. They didn't even bother to read the fine print of the legal contract I pushed across the table. They were so eager to be saved that they didn't realize they were walking into a trap I had been designing. A week later, I met them at the address of their new home. I drove my sleek, black SUV, while they followed in a cheap rented car, their remaining belongings packed into the cramped trunk. As we moved further away from the manicured lawns of the wealthy suburbs and deeper into the industrial, gray heart of the city, I saw Daisy's expression shift from excitement to dawning confusion. We pulled up to a weathered apartment building situated right next to a loud, screeching elevated train line. The air smelled of diesel fuel, wet pavement, and old grease. "There must be a mistake here," Martin barked, getting out of the car and looking around in disgust. "This is a slum. We can't stay here." I walked to the entrance and unlocked the heavy, scarred steel door. "No mistake, Martin. This is Unit 4B. It's secure, it's functional, and it's yours." I led them up a flight of stairs that groaned and complained under our feet. The apartment was a single, cramped room with a tiny kitchenette and a window that looked out onto a blank brick wall. It was the exact neighborhood where the bus had dropped me off. Daisy walked into the center of the cramped room and began to sob hysterically. "I can't live like this. Look at this carpet. Look at the noise." A train thundered past the window, shaking the thin walls and making the single light bulb flicker. Martin turned on me, his face turning a dangerous mottled shade of purple. "You think this is funny? You're mocking us. We are your parents, your own flesh and blood." I stood my ground, my hands folded calmly in front of me, radiating a peace they couldn't touch. "I think it's appropriate. This is exactly where I started my adult life, because of you. You wanted me to have initiative, didn't you? Well, here it is. You have a roof over your heads, which is more than you gave me when you drove away from O'Hare. And as for the assets you signed over, they've been used to pay back the people you cheated. You have exactly $20 left in your joint account." I put it in an envelope on the counter. I watched as the realization hit Martin like a physical blow. He reached for the envelope, his fingers trembling. Inside was a single, crisp $20 bill. "You can't do this to us!" Martin screamed, the sound muffled by another passing train that drowned out his rage. "We have rights. We'll sue you for everything you have." I smiled, and it was a cold, sharp, architectural smile that showed no mercy. "Sue me with what money, Martin? You signed everything over to my management firm. I own this building. I own your debts. And according to the contract you didn't read, if you attempt to contact the press or harass me, the lease is terminated immediately, and you'll be evicted onto the sidewalk. You are exactly where you put me 17 years ago, cold, alone, and forced to find your own way home." I turned to leave, but the door opened before I could reach the handle. A woman walked in, looking stunned and pale. It was my younger sister, Mallory. She was 22 now, the golden child who had been sent to elite private boarding schools while I was being toughened up. But Mallory didn't look like a golden child anymore. She was carrying a suitcase and a look of absolute soul-crushing betrayal. She didn't even look at Martin or Daisy. She looked at me. "Mallory, darling, tell her!" Daisy wailed, reaching for her younger daughter's arm. "Tell her she's being cruel and heartless." But Mallory stepped back, avoiding her mother's touch as if it were toxic. "I can't, Mom, because I found the ledger. I found everything." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. It was Martin's private gambling log, a record of his secret life. For years, he hadn't just been betting on me at the airport. He had been betting on every single aspect of our lives, as if we were racehorses. Bet $200, Kaylyn fails her math test. Bet $500 Daisy forgets our anniversary. Bet $1,000 Mallory cries during her recital. He had turned our entire childhood into a spreadsheet of misery for his own private entertainment. Mallory had found it while packing up the secret safe in the mansion. She looked at me, her eyes red from crying. He made $50,000 off your airport adventure, Kaylyn. He had friends from the club watching you from their cars. They followed you the whole way home just to make sure he didn't lose the bet. You weren't alone because they cared. You were alone because they were verifying the win. The room went completely silent, except for the low hum of the ancient refrigerator. The betrayal was deeper and more systemic than I had ever imagined. They hadn't just left me. They had stalked me like prey to ensure a payout. I felt a surge of cold rage, but I channeled it into the structure of my plan. "Wait," I said, looking at Mallory's trembling hands. "There's more in there, isn't there?" Mallory nodded and opened the ledger to the very final page, which was dated only a few months ago. "He didn't just bet on us when we were kids. He bet against the very company you're trying to build right now, Kaylyn. He's been shorting your stock and feeding false, damaging information to your competitors for months. He wanted you to fail so you'd have to come crawling back to him for protection and money. He didn't lose his money on bad luck or honest investments. He lost it all trying to destroy your reputation." The room seemed to tilt on its axis. The people standing in front of me weren't just bad parents. They were active, malicious enemies. Martin tried to speak, but his voice failed him. "But wait," I said, a new, sharper thought occurring to me as I looked at the dates. If he was shorting my stock, he needed a partner, someone with deep inside access to my personal life. I looked directly at Daisy. Her rehearsed tears had dried instantly, replaced by a mask of cold, hard calculation. "Daisy, you were the one who provided the login credentials for my private server, weren't you? You stole them when you visited my office for lunch last year. You went into my bag when I was in the restroom." Daisy didn't even bother to deny it anymore. She just shrugged, her face a stone. "We needed the money to maintain our lifestyle, Kaylyn. You have so much success. What's a little professional setback for you compared to our comfort?" I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. I had anticipated a betrayal, but this was a total collapse of their morality. "Well," I said, checking my watch, "I have one more twist for you. Mallory, did you bring the other files we discussed?" Mallory reached into her bag and pulled out a small digital recorder. "I recorded them talking about the short yesterday, Kaylyn. They admitted to everything." Martin collapsed onto the moth-eaten, stained sofa, looking like a man whose soul had finally left his body. "What do you want from us?" he whispered, his voice broken. "You've already taken everything we own." I leaned over him, my shadow falling heavily across his face. "I want the truth about the train station bet, the one from 5 years ago in Europe." Martin's eyes widened in genuine shock. "What are you talking about?" I turned to Mallory, who was biting her lip. "He didn't just do it to me, Martin. He did it to Mallory at a train station in London when she was only 15. He left her there overnight to test her grit, but it was just another bet, wasn't it?" Mallory nodded, her jaw set tight with a strength she had found in the truth. "He told me it was a cultural immersion test, but I found the entry in the ledger. He won $10,000 that night." I looked back at Martin. "You're a monster, Martin. But you're a predictable one. You use the same lawyer for your offshore accounts that you used for your gambling debts. That lawyer is currently being raided." The final piece of the complex puzzle clicked into place. "And here's the best part of the whole design," I said, looking around the dismal gray room. "I don't actually own this building." Martin looked up, a tiny, pathetic glimmer of hope in his watering eyes. "You don't?" I shook my head slowly. "No, Mallory does. I bought it in her name as part of her trust fund. You are now officially the tenants of the daughter you also abandoned and betrayed, and she's far less forgiving than I am." Mallory stepped forward, her voice ringing with a strength she hadn't possessed an hour ago. "The rent is due on the 1st of every month, Dad. And if you're even a single minute late, I'm calling the police with this digital recorder." "You wanted to live on initiative? Well, you'd better start looking for a job immediately. I hear they're hiring janitors for the night shift at the airport. It would be a nice, poetic, full-circle moment for you to clean up the floors where you once placed your bets. Martin stared at her, finally realizing the extent of his failure. I walked to the kitchen counter and picked up the envelope containing the $20. I handed it to Mallory. "Keep it for the security deposit. They're likely to cause damage." I turned back to my parents for the last time. "You're not parents. You're just two people I used to know a long time ago. I've spent my life building structures that could withstand any storm, any betrayal. You were the storm, and I survived you. Now you have to survive yourselves." I walked out of the apartment, the sound of their frantic, high-pitched arguing fading as the heavy steel door clicked shut with finality. I felt a strange, light sense of peace. The architecture of my life was finally complete. I had cleared the wreckage, laid the deep foundation, and built something that would last. As I walked down the creaky stairs, I realized that I wasn't that 11-year-old girl by the pillar anymore. I was Kaylyn Blackwood, and I had finally truly made it home. The air outside felt fresh and clean, despite the city smog. I drove away, leaving the ghosts behind in the gray building by the tracks. 6 months later, I was standing on a dusty construction site in the suburbs. It was the exact location of Martin and Daisy's former mansion. I had purchased the land through a series of complex shell companies and secured the contract to develop the site. We weren't building another mansion for an ego-driven gambler. We were building a modern community center for displaced youth. A place where kids who had been abandoned or neglected could find the resources, the love, and the education they needed to build their own lives. As the massive wrecking ball swung into the master bedroom, I felt a profound sense of catharsis. The walls that had once contained so much silent misery were crumbling into a pile of dust and debris. My firm was the lead architect on the project, and we were donating all our fees to the center's permanent endowment. It was the ultimate, quiet revenge, taking the sight of their ego and turning it into a beacon of hope for people who started just like me. I watched the dust settle, the sun setting beautifully behind the steel skeleton of the new building. I received a formal letter yesterday. It was from a small legal firm representing Mallory. She had finally followed through and evicted Martin and Daisy from the apartment. Apparently, they had tried to bet their way out of a mounting debt with a local shopkeeper, and the resulting brawl had violated the strict terms of their lease. They were now living in a state-run shelter, the ultimate initiative test they had so often preached. Martin had tried to call my office one last time, but I didn't even see the notification. My assistant had instructions to delete any calls from that area code. I had finally changed my personal number and moved into a quiet home that no one from my past could ever find. I was sitting on my balcony with Julian, watching the city lights twinkle like diamonds. He took my hand, his grip warm, steady, and honest. "You did it, Kaylyn," he whispered, looking at me with pride. I looked out at the horizon, at the distant, blinking glow of the airport lights. "No," I said, a smile finally touching my lips. "We did it! And the game is finally over." As I closed my eyes that night, I thought about the little girl by the big blue pillar. I wanted to reach back through time and tell her that it was okay to be scared, but that the fear would eventually become her greatest, most reliable strength. I wanted to tell her that the 6-hour walk through the cold was just the beginning of a magnificent, successful journey. I realized that my parents didn't make me tough. I made myself tough in spite of them and their cruelty. Their bet was the greatest mistake of their lives, and my success was the greatest achievement of mine. I am Kaylyn Blackwood, and I am no longer looking for a way home. I am home. And the architecture of my future is more beautiful than I ever dared to imagine as a child. The story of the girl left at the airport didn't end in tragedy. It ended in a masterpiece of survival, resilience, and quiet justice. The $20 was spent, the bet was settled once and for all, and the daughter was finally free to live her own life. I drifted off to sleep. Around here, people always have a choice, and when they choose wrong, life doesn't argue. It answers back. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment and tell me what you think. And if you're not already part of Revenge with Teen, go ahead and subscribe.